Hello friends, Jennifer Pearson here. This is going to be a little bit different because I'm actually reading from something that I've written, although I will probably depart a little bit from what I've written, just like I'm doing now. And I do have something that I will be adding in here that just happened. This is going to be a little bit rambly because I'm going to start with talking about the specific deck that I worked with in May, I have been working with, and then I'm going to talk in more general terms about what I learned from working with that deck and the reflections about oracle cards that it spurred. So this is going to be kind of two parts. And if I think about it, I will put timestamps down in the description box so that you can jump if you care to jump from one to the other. So my oracle deck for the month of May has been The Heart of Faerie by Brian and Wendy Froud. So I believe that's father and daughter. It was actually published 10 years after The Fairies Oracle by Brian Froud and Jessica Macbeth. And the Heart of Faerie is considered a less useful deck than the Fairies Oracle. I love the Fairies Oracle, and I love Brian Froud's art, and I do love relationship readings. So as soon as I found out there was a relationship-focused deck by Brian Froud, I set my sights on someday owning it. Since it was out of print and going for outrageous prices when I first was looking, it was a long wait before I got my hands on one. I got it knowing that it might not be a good working deck, which is to say, I bought it as a Froud fan. I also got it when I wasn't too busy to be reading for others, so I haven't been in a rush to explore it. That said, it's one I've been very curious to test, so now that the moment has arrived, I was mildly obsessed to start with for like the first week. I quickly saw that there were disconnects between how Wendy Froud perceived the fairies on the cards and how I did. Also, the deck as a whole didn't seem that focused on love. She seemed to approach it as a set of personality archetypes, like queen, or is it ladies, and lords, are a lot of the card titles. So personality archetypes that would characterize a romantic interest. So that would work if a question was, who is my partner at his core, or what aspect of my partner's personality is hidden from me? However, the cards didn't seem to tell me what was going on in a relationship. It was a bunch of who's, people. So I decided to discard the guidebook, which is becoming almost universal for me with these oracle decks, and see if I could come up with my own responses to the cards. I found that I could, and that they were largely emotions such as respect or hurt from rejection. Wendy's thief became sincerity for me, so there's quite a difference in her perceptions and mine. And her crone became my gossip. Her sorrow card, I think it was Lady of Sorrows or something like that, struck me as having a vengeful expression rather than a sad one. So I generated new keywords or phrases for each card, and then I tried it in a series of relationship-related readings. This is a bit tough for any deck since I'm not in a relationship, but I gave it a shot. I quickly felt that getting love advice from fairies is a dangerous endeavor. It was giving me some feedback that I knew was not healthy, was not good advice. I decided to ask it what kind of reading it wanted to do, and it indicated that it wanted to eliminate or clear out toxic relationships so that people were happy to be single. It's a bit of a contradiction for a love deck to want to lead people toward being single. Even though this deck has enough cards, which is a total of 68, to stand on its own in a spread, I decided to try it as a clarifier using other decks as the primary message. That worked somewhat better. It often showed a darker aspect to what was going on. However, I can't say it got along well with any of the decks I paired it with, which were other love-oriented decks. So the Romantic Tarot by Lo Scarabeo, the Tarot of Sexual Magic, and the Tarot of Casanova Tarot. I can't remember if there were other love-oriented decks, but those three in particular. I also tried it with the Greenwood, since they're both Celtic-themed decks from that area of the world, and then with the Chicoli for no good reason, just to try it with a deck that wasn't an attempt to pigeonhole it as, Celtic or love-oriented, or something, to just try something kind of random. This pairing, bit of a pairing frenzy, spurred me into testing a bunch of different pairings, and I discovered that there were a few decks that worked to clarify the fairies themselves. So I essentially abandoned trying, having a base reading that the fairies were clarifying, and instead used the fairies as a base reading and was going through other decks to see what might clarify the fairies. Perhaps the fairies are offended by being treated as a secondary add-on deck instead of the headliner. And although that sounds a little tongue-in-cheek, I really find that the fairy decks, make of this what you will. Those of you who just think that they're cards on paper, and maybe they are, but at their base, of course they are. But fairy decks, I feel, at least the Froud decks, I don't think I've gotten that feeling from other fairy decks, but I don't have a lot of other fairy decks, need to be treated a certain way in order to be completely cooperative. I've continued to use it this way, using the fairies and then clarifiers for daily draws throughout May. But even so, I suspect it will end up being a collector's deck, a fan deck, rather than a usable one. It doesn't seem reliable and is inclined to tell me about things that are peripheral to my life, things or people that are peripheral to my life. For example, yesterday it seemed to be telling me about something that about another person that I had seen on YouTube, like in the news. So it's like, well, you watch this thing about somebody else. So it always seems to be kind of talking about peripheral things. So one thing I thought I would do is share with you the list of decks that seem to get along with the fairies as a clarifier for them. So one is the Whispers of the Ocean Oracle, the Divine Dogs Oracle. Well, no, I'm going to scratch the Divine Dogs. That one was so-so. The Nature Speak Oracle by Ted Andrews. The Angels Oracle by, his last name is Duguay, D-U-G-U-A-Y. Can't remember his first name. The Tao Oracle. The little angel cards, the little tiny ones, they're like $12 on Amazon. The Vintage Wisdom Oracle. I have a thumbs up on the soul cards, but I also have a note that it took some work and were things that I didn't want to see, which made it difficult to look at them. So the Enchanted Map and the Enchanted Blossoms Oracle. And I have stars, so I have not only a thumbs up, or I use up arrows, a thumbs up on the angel cards, and the Enchanted Blossoms, they also have an asterisk. So those two were particularly good, I felt, at clarifying the heart of Faerie. And then the other thing is that I had that last little bit there that says it's not very reliable. I still have to work even with the clarifying oracle cards in order to relate it to my day in any way. And I've tried it as like, give me advice for the day, just tell me about the day, various very general requests for information. It says that it is inclined to tell me about people or things that are peripheral in my life. So, given that, and I just have added that to this, I wrote this, most of this actually about 2 weeks ago now, and just haven't gotten back to recording it and taking pictures of the cards and things like that. And during that time I've been using it for the dailies and seeing this kind of strange sideways, talking about things on the periphery of my life and not kind of hitting dead center. And when I use that word peripheral, as I jotted this, just right before starting to record, I jotted that as just kind of an update on what I've been seeing in the daily draws. And the word peripheral stuck with me. And I thought, you know what, I don't think I've tested the fairies on anything shamanic or peripheral, otherworldly. And it makes sense that fairies would give you peripheral information, kind of hidden information, or I think I've heard in the past, I'm never somebody who's tried to see fairies. I don't know if I believe in them in quite that way, but that when you get advice about how to see the fairies, not to look directly, but to try to use your peripheral vision, etc. So I decided to pull out the deck on the spot and look into somebody that I see when I shamanically journey. And one of them, two. One of them is somebody who is a relation. So somebody who was a family member and has passed on. Not a super direct family member. And I'm not going to name names because should anybody in my family who finds this sort of thing creepy listen, I just don't want to go there. They're going to have to approach me directly if they want to know. So I'm sensitive to their own sensitivity about this sort of thing. But I wanted you to know one of them was like a direct relation that I have gotten help from when I've done ancestral journeys. And that was like that was the most spot on reading that I have gotten, the one I could make the most sense of from this deck. So it's like, all right, total thumbs up. I need to stop using the Heart of Faerie for everyday middle world, as they would say in shamanism, issues. Things in this, and in Tolkien actually, the middle world, right? The one that we're living in now, we're acting out now. I need to stop that, and I need to use them for peripheral worlds, for understanding what's going on, or the people in, and my relationship to people in peripheral worlds. So I tried it with a relation that had previously come forward, but I haven't been journeying recently. And so I thought, well, I'll just check in. It was a tell me about this person. And the reading was like, all right, I get it. I understand it now. Now the deck is talking to me and making clear sense. And then I tried it on, back when I was doing, I had a class in basic shamanism at the beginning of the year, January or February, and I did a video about that process. You know, what we did in the class, but I didn't get into too much detail, and I'm not going to now. But one of the things that she asked me to do was to go to the upper world and to seek a guide specifically from the upper world. And when I did that, I ended up seeing a person who was asleep and like entombed. So it's like no access. And so, and not, this has nothing to do with relations. It, you know, has nothing to do with direct ancestors. This is an upper world guide. To me, that's a completely different thing than, not that the two can't intermix, but it's a completely different thing than an ancestor, particularly one that you know. So, and again, it gave me understandable, not as clear as the one for a previously living in this lifetime ancestor, but still, or yes, ancestor relation, however you want to think of it, but still it made sense to me. And I'm going to look at it again because I think it gives me really interesting information, and I may elaborate on that spread or ask it additional questions. So at this point, I wouldn't say that it's just going to be a collector's deck. I think it's found its role through my attempting to converse with you, which is one of the great reasons to do this sort of thing. I came upon something that I had forgotten to attempt with this deck because I was so stuck on it, you know, being, you know, supposed to be used for one thing and or having some use in readings for others, which I'm not really doing ancestor readings too much yet for other people. So, so it wasn't until I was jotting this down and kind of updating what I had written previously that the light bulb went off. And now it's clear to me what this deck is about. In fact, it's so clear that I'm not going to continue to use it through the rest of May. I'm doing this, I think it's the 20th today. I don't have a calendar handy. And who knows when I'll get it uploaded. It might not be till the end of the month. But I think I will probably move on to next month's Oracle deck, which is actually a tarot deck in structure. But I've put it among my oracles for this year because I'm not sure that it's going to be usable as a tarot deck. And that is the Inner Child cards. So I think I'm just going to start my adventures with the Inner Child cards and Heart of Faerie. This is going to be one of my ancestor and otherworldly guides decks. So there you have that. So we're now transitioning into a talk more about this process of pairing in order to understand the role, or hoping to understand the role of the Faerie's Oracle, the Heart of Faerie, I should say, the Heart of Faerie Oracle. And so, yeah, talking more generally. The process of attempting to pair oracles with tarot and with other oracles, on top of my overall experience evaluating oracle decks this year, had me questioning why I have oracle decks and prompted some reflection on my relationship to them. Some of my favorite decks are oracle decks, such as the Faerie's Oracle, the Enchanted Map, and the Medicine cards. These decks can be used on their own without a supporting tarot or oracle deck. It was only when I decided to try tarot again, several years ago, that I learned about the second-class status of oracle decks. I can see how a 44 or 36 or even a 52 card deck seems inferior to the 78 of a tarot deck. And I can see how pulling a card with a single word or phrase as is common with oracle cards, would prove a nice way to tie up a reading. However, I was used to reading oracle decks in complete spreads, usually 5-card spreads, and without clarifiers, and I haven't been in the habit of pulling clarifiers for tarot readings either. So how did I end up with this slippery slope of buying oracle decks? When I first discovered the world of divination decks on Amazon and YouTube, I was committed to only purchasing decks with at least 50 cards, which is quite limiting in oracle decks. However, 44 seemed to be the standard, and the medicine cards has only 44 cards, and it was my primary deck for many, many years. So I then questioned why I was suddenly being, a card number snob. That something has to have at least 50 cards. In the end, I think I started buying oracle decks because I was attracted to the art, as with the Wild Kuan Yin, or I was attracted to the concept, such as the Goddess Oracle. But I never took the extra step of incorporating them into my practice, such as pairing them with other decks or using them in a particular way. While my favorite oracles do stand on their own and are quite versatile, like a tarot deck is, many others are definitely made to play a supporting role. And I don't need dozens of supporting cast members among my decks. I'm finding that for me, oracles fall into 5 categories. So we have the daily draw decks. And I'll talk a little bit down here about the fact that I really haven't done daily draws that much. I'm not somebody who does that, has really ever done that religiously. I'm doing it more now as I evaluate decks than I ever have. But number 1 is daily draw decks. 2, standalone decks, such as the Enchanted Map. An example of a daily draw deck would be like the Wild Kuan Yin. Number 3 is a supporting cast deck, such as the Angel cards. And number 4 is a special purpose deck, such as the Archetype cards by Carolyn Meese, or Mice, I'm not sure how you say her name. And number 5, just what I call the heartstring decks, like the Spirit Cats Oracle, which is just so cute and so friendly and fuzzy and cool. So those are the 5 categories. And if a deck doesn't tick one or more of those boxes, preferably more, I need to let them go. So that's kind of how I'm looking at them now, is through these categories. What I'm finding as I experiment with deck pairings is that some oracle decks are really good in the supporting role, such as the Whispers of the Ocean, which actually surprised me. I didn't realize how good that deck was going to be. Again, I thought it was maybe a little bit more thematic, but it's not. It works quite broadly. And those little angel cards, which I've had for eons. I don't know, like 30 years I've had those little, gosh, at least that. Yeah. That I've had this deck of little tiny cards. Both of those decks work well with almost any deck. That being the case, I don't need to purchase any more supporting cast type of decks. Really, I've got at least 2 that could work with almost anything, so I don't need any more. Last summer, out of a misguided sense of equality, I decided to bring my number of oracle decks up to the same number of tarot decks that I had. So I kind of was feeling as though I was shorting and not showing proper loyalty to the oracle decks, because I do love, certain oracle decks anyway. Yet, I now realize that one oracle deck can work well with multiple tarot decks, and I only need a few versatile oracle decks. So I just need to find out which ones are the most versatile and kind of cut the purchasing cord there. Since I don't normally have a daily draw habit, that whole classification gets called into question as a reason to even have them, certainly as a reason to buy more. So, in the first 3 months of this year, I pretty much ended up with, like 4 decks that could be used for daily draws. I don't know that I even need more than that, and we're not even halfway through the year in terms of my going through my Oracle decks. So there could be more in here that would fit that classification. Yeah, and then I noticed too that when I was doing my daily draws in that January, February, March time frame, I enjoyed them with those decks, and I missed those decks and that habit when I moved on to the next month's deck. That did not prove true with the 2 decks I worked with in April, which were Art Through the Star Stream and Art Through the Eyes of the Soul. And I was on the fence about keeping or letting go of those 2 decks, and I was siding toward keeping until I realized I didn't miss working with them. And so I have a new classification, and those at that, or I would say this, criterion for keep or not keep. I have a new criterion, and that is if the deck is forgettable when I stop using it, if I don't miss it at all, I need to let it go. So forgettability has become a criterion for letting a deck go. So in addition to needing to fall into one of the 5 keeper categories, a deck needs to not be easily forgettable, whether on a daily basis or after a period of regular use. And what I mean by on a daily basis is if I pull the cards in the morning, do I, 1, forget to check in with them again in the evening to see, how I relate to the cards after, the day is done, and whether the following day I'm like, oh, it's time to go pull my cards, If it gets if I completely forget about it, then that's telling me I'm not getting very much out of what I'm doing with that deck. Another culling factor I'm seriously considering for all decks, Oracle or Tarot, is shuffleability. I was so happy when the new edition of the Enchanted Map came out that it was more shuffleable cardstock. I was like, thank God. I actually love that deck, and but I don't use it real often because it is not very shuffleable. And now there is a new edition. I don't know if it was a couple of years ago it came out. I was just seeing it recently. That is easily shuffleable cardstock. Hallelujah. I may someday do a run through all of my decks and set aside those with problematic cardstock and see what I have left. But that's a project for another day. For now, it's just another deciding factor for my monthly decks and not a make or break one. I've kind of discovered over the years different ways to adapt to a deck that is difficult to shuffle. So, going forward with my monthly Oracle decks, I'm assessing, 1, whether it's a standalone deck, 2, whether it pairs well with other decks, whether as a primary deck, like the base deck that you use, or a secondary one clarifying another deck. Number 3, how missable or forgettable it is. And number 4, how easy it is to shuffle. As usual, I'll also be trying them in different types of spreads, whether for career or for romance, for general, just kind of looking at that as well. And now, since the Faerie suddenly turned out to be particularly good for ancestor readings or otherworldly readings, maybe I somehow need to include that in the mix of things that I try with each Oracle deck. Hard to say. I'm not sure that I'm not sure that I'll do that, but it's a whole month, so I can try a variety of things, right? All right, that's it. That's my monthly Oracle catch-up, where I'm at not only with this month's deck, but in the larger project of deciding whether to keep or let go of Oracle decks, and even kind of my future purchasing habits with Oracle decks. Take care, everybody, and I will see you again soon. Bye-bye.